Morning, everybody. We're just setting up. I'm just taking over. Sharing my screen. Okay, just checking. Can you see my screen, everybody? Can you see a brain with my name on it? Yes? Okay, good. At least some people can sit. Sorry, I'm just going to put this with fine. Hi, so my name is Vincent. Hopefully everybody can hear me. If you can't, well, you don't know what I'm saying, but you can come into one of the next sessions. And I'm a brain engineer, as Chris was saying. Now, thanks a lot for all your kind words, Chris, about the last sessions. I'm pleased to know this worked really well. And I'm here with one of my brains, or one of my skulls, and there's a brain in it. It's all in plastic, don't worry. It's just a plastic brain. So I'll be telling you a bit more in the next 15 minutes about what I do, and then I'll answer your questions. So I'm just going to try to bring up the chat to make sure I don't miss anything. Chat. Okay. So this is me, and before telling you exactly about what I do, I thought I'd give you a bit of background about myself and what I studied and where I'm from, because as you can guess from my accent, I'm not from here. So my job, so as Chris was saying, I'm a senior lecturer at King's College London, so I'm now a senior lecturer in neuroscience education. So I do research and I teach, so I spend my time more or less half-half. Half of the time I do research on trying to understand what the brain does, and what the differences are between various patient populations and healthy brains. And the other half of my time I do teaching. So I started by studying engineering initially back in France, and then I further specialized into computer engineering. I didn't really like it, so this was in my second year of university. I didn't really like it because it was far too theoretical. I wanted to do something a lot more practical. So I switched to biomedical engineering, so I did both in parallel. So which is engineering applying to medicine and all the professions allied to medicine. And then in that you can I decided to specialize on the brain. So some of my colleagues did specialize in heart or lungs or things like this. I chose the brain because for me the brain is really, really interesting. I couldn't find anything else than the brain. I didn't want to work in anything else than the brain because it's the most fascinating part of our body. So in my day-to-day job, in the research part and in the teaching I do, I guess, I try to understand how the brain works, exactly what's happening in the brain and why it sometimes goes wrong, and what we can do after something's gone wrong, what we can do to help people. All right. That's for the teachers, so I'm European. So it's in these terms of Brexit, we don't really know what's happening, especially in the universities as well. So we all, in this kind of strange situation, we have no idea what the future holds. So first, before going on to brains, I want to show you, my journey. So my parents are Italian, both of them, but I was born and raised in France. Just at the point where France, Belgium, and Luxembourg meet, really like 100 meters from each of them, and then a couple of kilometers from Germany as well. So really at the center of Europe. I studied in various places in France before taking on something called an Erasmus placement. So later on when you go to university, if this scheme is still available, you'll be able to travel to go and study in different countries. So I spent some months in Iceland studying, and then I came to London to finish my studies, and I never left. And this was about, I think, 20 years ago now. So I've been here in this country for about 20 years. So soon I'll be here. I would have been in England longer than I've been in France. And my wife is Russian, to complete the loop. And my children are in the middle. They're a big mix of everything. And I'm staying here. We're staying. So as Chris was saying, I work at King's College London, and I'm based in southeast London right now. And it's a nice sunny day outside. Hopefully it's the same for you. And I work in one part of King's College London called the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience. So the university is a really big university, teaching everything. but the part of the university I work in is called the IOPP. And so we specialize in research to do with psychiatry, psychology, and neuroscience. And really the big focus of our research here is on mental health. So all the different aspects of mental health and at all the different levels. So I'm a neuroscientist these days. So yes, I trained as an engineer and I still use my engineering skills every day. But your career changes. So right now, I'm a neuroscientist, which is some sort of a generic umbrella term for everybody who's working with the brain. So there's different levels of neuroscientists. So some of my colleagues are working, for example, like you can see in the picture here, at looking at brain cells. So I don't know if you've heard about neurons yet. So neurons are the brain cells we have, so that that make up most of your brain, and clearly are all involved in our thinking. And in this slides here, you can see some neurons. I mean, they're not in the brain here, they're on a plate, but they're trying to connect to each other. You can see that they're also, you probably see my group chat window in front, I'm not sure. So these neurons are trying to, so if I start again the animation, yeah, they're trying to talk to each other, they're trying to attach to each other. And this is what's happening in your brains right now, even in the adults' brains. We always generate new neurons. Of course, as children, in your brain right now, it's an explosion of new neurons, an explosion of new connections being built. You're learning every day, you're learning loads of things, and it's quite easy for you to learn new things because you are making millions and millions and millions of neurons all the time. For adults, we still make new neurons, but far less, and that's one of the reasons why it's harder for us to learn as an adult. But I don't work at that level. Some of my colleagues, like Claire here, they work with real brains, so this is some real brains. And they're trying to really study the brain in this way, but I'm not doing this either. My job is to use a big machine, like here, it's an MRI scanner. So some of you may have been to a hospital to have an MRI scan. So we're using these big machines to study the living brain. So you can go in, the idea is you go in the scanner, you do an experiment, and we see what's happening in your brain when you do the experiment. What we get after, so we take a picture of your brain activity, and we get these kind of pictures made up of, not of Legos in our case, but it's the same idea. On our computers afterwards, we get these kind of brain maps with, we can see exactly what's happening in all the different bricks in the brain, all the different places. So the kind of things we do when we do neuroimaging, so that's, my job is, I work in the neuroimaging department, so we image the brain. And really we're focusing on looking at brain anatomy or brain function. So if you think about brain anatomy, the kind of things we can do with an MRI scanner, this big machine I showed you before, we can study these, we produce these kind of images. So the one you see on the top left here, that I'm highlighting, is the type of images that doctors would be using to find if there's something wrong in your brain, if there's, for example, some bleeding, or if there's a tumor in your brain or something like this, they would be using these kind of images on the top left. The images on the top right here, it's an angiogram, so this would be used to look at all your blood vessels and the blood arteries in the brain, so looking at how the blood is flowing in the brain. And this would be used, for example, if the doctors suspect that the patient may have a stroke. So maybe some of your grandparents or great-grandparents have had strokes. It's something that sadly is quite common when you get much older. And a stroke would be a blockage, so it would be a blockage somewhere in the brain, and the doctors would use this scan to see that. And the two bits at the bottom is another neuroimaging technique we can use, again, still with the same machine. We just program the machine in different ways. And here we're trying to map all of the, not all of them, but the main connections in the brain between the different regions of the brain, producing these kind of spaghetti-like maps of the different connections in the brain. So all this type of imaging and many more, we can use both, the doctors are using this in the clinic to help patients, but we're using this for research as well. We're trying to understand, for example, for this picture at the top left here, which is just a normal picture of brain anatomy, we're trying to see what's different between, the brain in terms of anatomy of somebody who's got, for example, depression and somebody who hasn't. So we're trying to see where are the differences. Are the differences in brain anatomy? Is it differences in the connections between brain regions? Is it differences in blood, in the blood flow to these regions? So we're trying to understand this using brain anatomy. So using the same machine, again, the MRI scanner is just like a big computer. You just program it to do different things. And most of my own work is about studying the function of the brain, what's happening in your brain when you're doing something, rather than looking at brain anatomy. And the idea is, as I said, we put you in the MRI scanner, and then we make you do some experiments depending on what we're trying to study. So we make either some memory experiment, or playing some games in the scanner, or some things when you have to say some specific words. And then we see which parts of your brain are involved when you do these experiments. And then again, we would try to see what the difference is between you. And for example, we study brain development. So what would be the difference in your brain versus your big brother and sister's brain versus your parents' brain versus your grandparents' brains when you're doing the same experiment, to see how the brain is aging, for example. So it's not just about finding out what's happening in the brain of people with various diseases. It's trying to understand the normal brain as well over the different age spans. So this is an example of an experiment you would be doing where you would have these two figures, and you would have to find out if they're the same figure rotated. So is the one on the right the same as the one on the left, which has been rotated, or is it a completely different figures? So you would have to do this, of course, without moving anything, just by moving them in your head, moving them in your mind. And what's interesting with this kind of experiments, for example, we see that the time it takes for you to respond is linked to how rotating they are. So the more you rotate these figures, the more you have to rotate them in your head, the longer it takes you to respond, because actually you are really in your head rotating them. So whilst you're doing this experiment in the scanner, it's like a film. We take every second, we take a picture of your brain activity using the MRI scanner. And then we use mathematics, and we use a branch of mathematics called statistics to bring together the brain images we get every second and what we know about the experiment. Because every second when you are doing this experiment, we know what's on the screen, we know what button you've pushed, we know what you're looking at, and then we can, it's called correlated. So, with mathematics, we can align the images and whatever you're doing to end up producing these kind of images, which show, so basically here we're looking at somebody from the back, so we're looking at the back of the head, and you can see that this person here is looking at something on the screen, and depending on what you're looking at, different parts of your brain are being lighting up, if you want. I mean, nothing lights up in reality, but different parts of your brain are using more oxygen because they are being involved in doing the experiment. So that's what we do in general. But what about engineers? So, in this grand scheme of, neuroimaging, we work in big teams. It's not something you do on your own. So when you do a project like this, a neuroimaging project like the one I showed you before, with just looking at things on the screen, there's a big team involved. So if you have, if we're working with patients, we would have doctors, of course, so in our case, psychiatrists or neurologists. We would have psychologists who are designing the experiments. We would have engineers to build all the equipment we need and to write the experiment itself. Then we would have, when you're scanning people, we would have, NHS professionals, so we would have radiographers and medical physicists there. And then we have engineers, again, mathematicians to write all the software. So it's a big team, but I just wanted to finish by telling you what the engineers themselves are doing, including myself. So one of the things we do, of course, is we build the equipment as engineers. So we build the hardware. So the scanner itself, we haven't built, we bought it. And an MRI scanner, just to give you an idea, costs about between $1 million and $1.5 million in terms of pounds. But we don't build the scanner, but we may build a lot of the equipment which is used for the various experiments. All the joysticks and everything that the researchers need, the engineers can build. A lot, of course, the other thing we do is we write all the software. So it's the software to present the experiments when you are lying in the scanner, to present the things moving and everything. So you have to program all these experiments, and then of course you have to program all the software to analyze all these data, to do all these mathematics and statistics, and to do all these beautiful 3D three-dimensional visualization of the brain, like you can see here, of things moving, brains moving and everything. So it's engineers and computer programmers and mathematicians, statisticians are working together to build these things. So this is just some pictures of the equipment we've built here, just to give you an idea. So this is some of the joysticks, top left, some of the button boxes and joysticks we built, because the MRI scanner is a big magnet. So the strength of the scanner is always on, and the strength of the magnet is the same as the magnets you've got lifting cars. You know, you see sometimes, you may have seen some of these pictures, lifting cars to crush them. So it's the same strength of the magnet. So you cannot go in a room with anything metallic on you, and you cannot just buy a joystick from, you know, Tesco or Sainsbury's or whatever, and use it. It's not going to work. It's going to break. It'll probably break the scanner as well. So we have to build everything we need. These days it's so much easier because we 3D print a lot of things. So this is an example of the boxes. What you see on the right is an example of a device which was built to apply some pressure on joints. So this was an example of an experiment done on elderly people. We've got something called arthritis, so they have a lot of pain in their joint. Again, some of your grandparents or great-grandparents may have this. So we're trying to understand, you know, what the disease does to the brain. I understand the type of pain and everything. So this is a device to, you know, to apply some pressure to you know, induce a bit of pain so that we can measuring. Of course, everything we do has to be approved by the university. We cannot just do some crazy experiments. I know there are some rules about what we're allowed to do and we're not allowed to do. So the one at the bottom here, bottom right, it's actually for the same study on people with, you know, arthritis. This simulates turning a key. It's something we do every day, all day, you know, turning, you know, opening doors or door handles or turning keys. But if you have arthritis and if it hurts in your joints, this will hurt. Doing this movement may hurt a lot. And what's really interesting in terms of studying the brain is a lot of the patients, they start being in pain even before they turn, because they know they're going to be in pain. So the pain starts even before they do the movement. So we're trying to understand what's happening there in the brain. And the crazy kind of experiment at the bottom there, this was something we built out of a recycling box, the green recycling box, for a study involving smelling things. So you were, you know, or subjects was lying in the MRI scanner, and you had different smells, some pleasant smells, some unpleasant, some disgusting smells. And the idea was just to see what's happening in the brain when you're smelling different things. So we built this contraption there with different tubes, with different bottles with different types of smelly things in it. And then there was a pump pushing the smell to a mask like this. So that's the kind of things we build. You know, when all researchers, would be the psychologists or the doctors, psychiatrists, would come to see us, say, well, I want to do this experiment. I would need this type of equipment, and we can build it for them. On the software side, then once we have all the equipment we need, we can actually start doing the experiment. But you know, when you are lying in the MRI scanner, you would see these experiments. So the top left here, which seems to have stopped, is something you would do in some sort of virtual reality experiment where you would have to find where you are. So you would start on one of these yellow platforms, and you have to look around you to see where you are. You know, there's a house, you've got a yellow car. On my right, there's 3 houses. So you have to learn where you are within a landscape. And then in the next part of the experiment, later on, you are dropped somewhere else at random, and you have to go back to where you were initially. So you have to remember where you are. So this is an interesting experiment because it's an adaptation of an experiment done on rats and mice. What they do the same thing, except they put them in little swimming pools with little platforms. So they have to just swim around until they go on the little, you know, on the little pole, so they can rest. And then the experiment is, then you put something in the water so that they can't see the platform, and they have to remember where they have to go. So this is the human version of this. The one on the right, top right, is just a simple experiment where you would have a joystick in your hand, and you just have to, you know, follow the numbers and the letters in order or in reverse order, or you have to skip one, you have to skip 2, or depending on what the instructions are. So, you know, this could be more or less challenging depending on what you've got. If you have specific, you know, brain disorders, brain diseases, this may be really hard for you to skip or to go backwards. or if you have, some problems with, the parts of your brain at the top that deal with motion, for example, with movement, it may be really hard to move the joystick, but we're trying to see what's happening in your brain when you're trying to do it. The one bottom left, and that I think I've finished after that, it's an experiment we did to try to understand what's happening in your brain when you go shopping. This was filmed in a supermarket, and the little cross you see moving, oops, something just stopped. The little cross you see moving is where your eyes are looking. So we're using something called an eye tracker to see where you're looking at in the picture. And then we're studying what's happening in your brain when you're moving in the supermarket, when you're looking at different products, different prices, what's going to push you to buy something rather than something else. And finally, the one on the right, I think it looks like my computer maybe is struggling with all these videos. The one on the right is an experiment we're doing right now on children with ADHD. You may know what ADHD is about, hyperactivity. The idea of this experiment, and so it's not supposed to be like this, it's supposed to be quite smooth moving. You're playing a video game with your mind. So the idea is you go in the MRI scanner, you don't have a controller, you don't have anything, and you're trying to make this character go up and down, and ideally as high as you can in this case, by just thinking about it. So we don't give you any instructions, we don't tell you anything, but the idea is if for children with ADHD, we know where the differences are in the brain, and we're trying to normalize, we're trying to make make the children with ADHD change the way their brain works by playing these kind of video games. So you're trying to change brain activity in a specific region of your brain, which is different when you have ADHD. It's a specific part of your brain which is less, which is working less well when you have ADHD, and we are trying to teach you on demand to increase brain activity in this region, and hopefully to see some differences in behavior afterwards. So right now, we've done a study like this a couple of years ago, it worked really well, and now we're doing a proper, what's called a clinical trial. So we're evaluating this as a potential treatment now. So it's a 5-year project, we're 2 years in, I think, but yeah, nearly 2 years in, and hopefully this will be a treatment for ADHD if everything goes well. So I think that's it for me. So hopefully you know a bit more about what I do. So studying the brain, so the living brain, trying to understand what's happening. And I guess now I'm just going to take your questions. Thank you very much. Some of the chats.
Wonderful. Thanks, Vincent. Can you close down the presentation so your face is full screen? Because that
yeah,
always helps. That's better. Wonderful. Okay, guys, so if anyone has any questions, could you please type them into the chat, and Vincent will read them out and answer them.
Yep. So I don't have to go anywhere at 11:30, so I can overrun a bit if there's many questions.
Yeah, well, you did slightly overrun on the 15-minute presentation, but hey.
Sorry.
No, it's fine by me. It was excellent.
I always speak too much. Yes.
Okay, so there's one from Stokeminster, so I'll leave you to unmute yourself.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Chris. Oh, that's a hard question to start with. So I guess I don't know if everyone has got the chat, so I'll be reading it from A. Mikhalauskas. How do brain cells connect? Well, if you remember the little picture before, the little graphic with all the cells connecting, that's what they do. They're just there, and they just throw away their little dendrites and axons, as we call them. They just throw these things away until they touch another neuron, and then they attach each other. It's amazing that these things happen in the brain, and that it builds such a complex system at the end. So some of my colleagues are trying to understand exactly how this process works, because, well, it's not exactly a mystery. We know what's happening. It's all based with chemicals and everything. But it's amazing to see that you start with these cells which are on their own, and then they just attach to each other, and they build different organs and a really complex organ. Mercy College Belfast, how long did it take you to qualify? That's from Amy. I studied the equivalent of what's an MEng, so a master's in engineering in France. So this was 5 years. I mean, I went to an engineering school. So it was 5 years to qualify as an engineer, I guess. In the UK, it would probably be the same, I guess, 4 or 5 years if you want to have a master level. You go 3 years of undergrad, so it'd be 4 years, and then 1 year in university. But you never stop learning. I then, later on, I did a PhD, which was I did it part-time as I was working, so I was another 6 years of just doing that. But you never stop learning. You never stop, going to courses and learning new things. And these days, I guess you have to be ready yourselves. We never stop learning. It's about lifelong learning now. You don't just learn something and then use it for the rest of your life. You always have to keep on learning and re-qualifying. Itoquel, any of you or your colleagues they're working? Yes, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. So it's a question about, are you or any of your colleagues ever disconcerted by working on the actual physical brain? Well, yes. I mean, personally, for example, I don't want to see real brains. I'm really not. I don't mind seeing brain cells, in a dish, but I don't want to be manipulating or seeing real brains. So I'm staying, I'm looking at brain images on the computer. So, neuroscience is so vast as a field that you can really focus on one area. So you can, for example, some of my students, they don't even want to visit the animal facilities, and that's fine. They don't want to do that. They never want to work with animals. Other students don't want to work, or staff don't want to work with patients. They only want to work with, study the healthy brain. And it's fine, you can specialize in your own areas. But as far as I'm concerned, I certainly don't want to manipulate real brains. San Bartholomew, I can't pronounce it, sorry, Bartholomew Primary School. Who was your inspiration? And from Katie, when did you decide to become an engineer? That's from Rachel. So the first one was my inspiration. Well, I didn't have any, when I was your age, I guess, in school, I was really interested in a lot of different things. I didn't have any specific aspiration, especially in terms of engineering. I was always really interested in space, that's for sure. So, astronauts and things like this were really my inspiration. Not that I wanted to be one, but I was just, anything to do with space I found fascinating. So I guess I would say, astrophysicists or astronauts were my inspirations. But I was just interested in everything, not just in that. And when did I specifically decide to become an engineer? Well, I don't think, I was always interested in this. And then, when we started doing programming in school, like I guess now you're doing Scratch. So we were doing the same kind of things when I was 10 years old, learning to program in something called Logo, which is more or less the same as Scratch, moving a little turtle on the screen. That's when I really discovered that I was really interested in technical things. Exactly what I didn't know, and I didn't know until late. I didn't know until university exactly what field I was interested in. So the biomedical engineering, I just fell into it because I wanted something more practical. So, but no, doing something technical, I decided quite early on. But exactly what I didn't know. And another inspiration, I guess, in my case was my granddad. I was the first in my family to go to university, and the first, I guess me and my brother later on. So it was really important, and my granddad was always really proud of this, and that made us want to do, even more in a way. And he was a man who used to know about everything. So he was another inspiration for me at that age, at your age. From Michalos again. What inspired you? So I guess I mentioned this again. Adam Le Taroui. If we uploaded our brain into a computer, would our consciousness control it instead of us? So that's interesting. So right now we can't do that. There are people saying that it's coming because of all the progresses in artificial intelligence these days. So there's people predicting that this thing called a singularity would happen, I think, before 2050. Some people are predicting this is where we will have enough computing power to completely simulate a brain. Does it mean it will be conscious? I guess we don't know. But right now, you can already control computers with your brain. So you can do it, like playing the games I was telling you earlier. Or for people who've got, who are paralyzed or who've lost limbs, they can control robotic arms and things like this directly with their brain now. So there's a lot of progress in research into what's called neuroprosthetics, which is in, getting, replacement arms or legs if you've lost your leg or your arm, but controlled by your brain. From Sam Bartholomew again, what was your biggest achievement? Well, I guess I would say speaking to you is one of my biggest achievements, to be recognize that I've got something I can share with you. In terms of professional achievement, it's hard to know because I'm involved in a lot of different projects, and I guess most of us would probably say our biggest achievement is if we do something through our research that can change somebody's life. It's not just about studying something in your corner that has no impact. Most of the research we do, because of where we work, has a real impact on people's lives. For example, these big projects we're doing with ADHD, we evaluate a potential new treatment which doesn't involve medication. So that would be, if it works, it would be really important. So these are the kind of work that we're the most, I guess, the proudest of. Kramen P6P, why do you want to become an engineer? I think I mentioned it. It's just because I liked, it was really the first exposure to this was this kind of basic programming courses we had at school, like you're doing now in Scratch. And I thought, well, once I'm good at this, I could really see the logic behind all of this. I found it quite easy. And then I just, and remember this was a long time ago, begged my parents to buy a computer for us in the family. My parents had absolutely no use for it. But they finally at some point bought me a computer. My brother had no interest either in it. So I was the only one using it. And then that's how it really started. And what really, I guess, broadened my horizon, especially in these days, which were pre-internet, where you had to go to the library to find information, was to be subscribed quite young. My parents subscribed us to scientific reviews, scientific magazines for children, not adult version, but things for children. In France, we had one called Science et Vie. There was something to do. I guess the equivalent here, my children, for example, we subscribe to How It Works magazine. I mean, I'm not working for them, I'm not doing any publicity, but these kinds of things, when you have this thing coming every month, full of science, full of tech, all aspects from every side of science and tech, and that's what inspired me as a child, this kind of magazines, reading them regularly. And of course, you can go to the library. In all the libraries, they would have lots of magazines for you to look at. So you can, I'm sure we've got similar things in your school library, but just reading this, on and on, you start building a big picture of the world, the scientific world, and then you may choose one path. You say, oh, I'm really interested into that aspect, and you may decide to go that way in school, and then choose your GCSEs and your A-levels to match this specific interest. What other job would you have chosen if not biomedical engineering from Mercy College Belfast, from Callan? That's interesting. Well, in a way, I never thought of not being an engineer. I mean, when I was really, really a child like yourselves, I wanted to be, I think, a fighter pilot or a bidman, driving the truck. Fighter pilot I couldn't do because I had glasses. And then I discovered the reality of war, and I was not that interested in army anymore. And then I guess it's just by going to school, going to university, studying the technical side of things. So it was just a natural journey for me towards engineering. I guess if it's not the biomed, if I had stuck with the computing engineering, I probably, well, it's the same because I'm still a programmer. I mean, I'm doing a bit less these days because of my role has changed. So I probably, it's more like my students and my team who's doing it. But still involved certainly in the tech area. For Ituquel, what do you do for recreation? Okay, that's a good question, because as an academic these days, we don't have much free time. It's certainly not a 9-to-5 job. We are working, I mean, me and most of my colleagues working, evenings, weekends, holidays. We're not supposed to, but the amount of work we're doing means we often have to do this. And of course, all the marking, like your teachers would know, I know that lots of students, lots of exams, lots of courses to prepare. But I think the best thing, of course, for me is my wife and my children certainly don't let me work all the time. So what I do for recreation, well, for most of the time it involves just doing things with my kids, basically. Because when I'm not at work, I've got to be with them, to do things with them, bring them somewhere, going, as you all know, birthday parties and things like this. But if there's something else I do on my own, I guess I'm involved in a startup with some friends where we're really interested in space education, educating people, the public, general public, about anything to do with space. So we run series of talks in London. It's something called Mars Nation, and we run every couple of months, 3-4 months, we run an event for the general public to come and listen to somebody talking about space.
Vincent, can I just interrupt a second? Can I just remind everybody to make sure that the drop-down box on the chat facility says to everyone, because I've received a couple of questions that Vincent won't be able to see because they're aimed directly at me. So if you make sure it says to everyone, then Vincent will get it. Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry.
No problem. Moving on to from Adam Letaoui. I guess I have to pronounce it English way. Adam Letaoui. If we can ignore pain after a certain amount of time, is it still pain? I mean, that's a really deep philosophical question. And interestingly, some of my colleagues are working on the philosophical aspect of pain, trying to understand what is pain, what's the purpose of pain. I mean, we know the mechanistic purpose of pain, but it's just to make us go away from the flame or anything like this. But what's the point of having long conditions when you're in pain for 20 years? So that goes to answer your question. So some people have got various disease where you're in pain permanently, and there's nothing you can do about it. You cannot control it with painkillers. It just doesn't work. So sadly, the pain doesn't go away, but you get used to it. Certainly, it's still really disturbing, but you get used to it, and you have to you're developing and on your own or with therapists, developing strategies for pain management about how to try to distract yourself from the pain. But sadly, the pain doesn't go away, so you still feel it all the time, but you get used to it. So it's all about trying to train your mind, your brain, to push the pain away somehow. From Kramen P6P, how many brain cells do we have from Sky? Well, that's a really hard thing to answer. I would say billions and billions and billions for sure. And there's loads of different kinds of brain cells. There's not just the neurons I was mentioning about. There's loads of other types of brain cells. But just to give you a really rough idea, when we do this, when we do the brain imaging when we take pictures of people's brains, do you remember this picture, the Lego picture I had earlier? So the little bricks of Legos we use, that when we get the pictures from the scanners, sorry, that's my computer, I don't know if you heard that. The little bricks we've got, they're about like 1 millimeter cube, so a little cube of 1 by 1 by 1 millimeters. And in that size of a tiny little cube, we have already millions and millions of neurons and various brain cells and blood vessels and everything. So at the brain scale, it's billions and billions and billions of brain cells. So the brain is the most complicated structure that we've discovered so far. I guess you can count the universe maybe as being complex, but I think some people are saying that the brain is even more, one brain is even more complex than the whole of the universe, if you try to analyze it. From Adam, again, Adam Tari, is information encoded by neurons? Interestingly, this is still, we're still not sure about this. Because it's a big jump from thinking about, for example, memory. You remember something. You remember, your holidays. But trying to understand exactly what's happening at a single neuron level, where is this memory? Where are memories stored in the brain? We're still not too sure. Of course, we know it's all to do with the strength of the connections between neurons. So we know what's happening when memories are formed. When you're learning something, we know what's happening in your brain, for example. We can see that different neurons, they would just reinforce their connections. And the more and more you learn about the same thing, the stronger and the stronger connections between a specific set of neurons would be. But it's still not that clear exactly what's happening. So it's a really, really interesting research topic. From Kramen P6P, when people have ADHD, is there a name for the part of the brain that is different? So yes, I mean, it's a whole network of brain regions, but the brain region we're targeting in this game I was telling you about earlier, it's called the left inferior frontal gyrus. That's the name of this part of the brain, so left inferior frontal gyrus. And this part of the brain, it works a bit less well. So if there's a bit less brain activity, when you have to do the same experiment, somebody who has ADHD and somebody who doesn't have ADHD, this part of the brain still does the experiment, but a bit less well. And that's why we're trying. But we know that when we give medication to children or adults, with ADHD, brain activity in this region normalizes, becomes higher because of the medication. And so we're trying to do, through this research project we're doing now, we're trying to do the same thing, but without the medication. From Baron, how does stress affect children's brain development? Well, stress is a big problem for everybody these days. There's more and more, all of us, from children to adults, are under an increasing amount of stress. In terms of how it affects the brain specifically. Again, there's whole teams and research projects looking at this. There's a hormone or something. Somebody's been unmuted. Sorry, I can't. Yeah. Sorry, Michaluskas. Sorry, mute. Okay, that's it. Sorry, you were unmuted. Michaluskas, you're muted again. So yeah, there's an hormone. When you're under stress, there's an hormone called cortisol, which is released by your body, and this affects the brains in lots of different ways. It just changes the way the brain works. So there's certainly an increase in terms of mental health services. There's an increase in demand and pressure on mental health services. So it's probably both linked to, yes, there is probably an increase in stress level in general, but the other side of this is very much more awareness about stress and mental health in general. So people are more now, it's less taboo, there's less stigma about mental health. So people are more ready to talk about mental health and share their mental health issues. So that's why as well there's an increase in this. But certainly, yes, stress does affect the brain. And it's really important to go back to the recreation element that one of you asked earlier. It's really good to make sure that both children and teachers make sure that in your life you do other things. You don't just work, you don't just study, you do sport, especially physical activities. Is one of the best way to release stress. So make sure you do other things. You go and walk outside, you do something. You don't just always work or always study. Simpsons to everyone. Do you have to study for a long time to become an engineer? I think I mentioned it. So in my case, in France, it was 5 years. I think here it's 4 years, but you never stop studying after that. I mean, officially you've got your degree, but you would, because, especially when you do engineering, the technology these days changes so fast that you really always need to keep learning, either in your own time, you can learn by just, reading things or these days watching YouTube videos and things like this, or you can take online training. There's so much you can learn these days online by taking courses, free courses online on absolutely everything, including a lot of engineering topic, especially things to do with like programming, for example. Kramen P6P, what do you think the next big discovery in understanding the brain is going to be? From Chris. That's an interesting one. I mean, because there's so much research going on. Really, I think what's happening these days is we're really putting all the research together, because it used to be really separated. Some people were looking at brain anatomy, some people were looking at brain functions, some people were looking at genetics. There was not much communication, not much ways of bringing all of this together. And now, like most other sectors, we're using machine learning, we're using artificial intelligence to analyze our data, and we can bring all this data from all these different types of brain imaging, your DNA. We can bring all the data together and analyze everything at the same time. And I guess this is where the biggest advances are going to be, in harnessing the power of this big data. In our case, big data for neuroscience. We're going to be able to answer questions we were not able to answer before. So I'm just moving down. From Adam. Sorry, I've lost your question, Adam. Oh yeah, I've got it. Adam has created a 3D printed arm controlled by neuron measurements. We're making a neurocortex net. So this is from Adam. Oh, that's quite good. Is there any help we could get to link this to the arm? Well, all I can do is, email me, and if I can't help you myself, if you find, you've got my name, so if you just Google me, you'll find my email, and then I can put you in touch with people who should be able to help.
Or they can ask me.
Oh, we can ask. Yes, we can ask Chris. That's what you do, Chris. So.
Yep.
Okay. From Simpson to everyone. what do your colleagues study when looking at brain cells? Well, for example, they would try, when they look at the brain cells in the dish, they would try to see how the brain cells are developing on their own, how they're growing, how they're connecting to each other. And then they would be looking at different types of brain cells, and they would be looking at brain cells of, different disease. What's happening when you have something, when you're getting old, for example, you've got something called Alzheimer's. When you have, dementia, you lose your memory and everything. They would be trying to understand what's happening at the cell level in Alzheimer's, for example, or in different kind of disease. How much does an average brain weigh? Well, it's about, it's a couple of, I guess, I don't know exactly. I would have said about a kilo or something like this. But what's sure, I don't know exactly about the weight, but I know that the brain is what uses the most, the most blood, if you want, and the most oxygen in your body. It's your brain. About 20% of oxygen is used by the brain. What's your favorite part of your job? Again, from Simpson. Well, I guess it's that the job is always different. I mean, I think it's a fascinating thing to study the brain, and the job is always different. So, I'm not doing the same thing every day. I could be like talking to you for an hour, and then going back in the lab to do a bit of programming, and then do another teaching some medical students, and then we will have a meeting about a project we're going to start in a couple of months, and then writing some scientific papers. It's always different. Which I think that's really like, I don't think I would be good. Well, to be honest, I've never done it in a job which is always the same thing. And we're always learning, always the learning ethic. I'm always discovering new things. So all this brain research, the more we know, the less we know. We think we understand something, and then we realize actually by answering one thing, we've asked 10 more questions, which is going to be 10 more research projects. Baron, how is the brain affected by exercise, and how does diet affect the brain? Well, both diet, having a good diet and doing exercise is really good for the brain. And it's about what we were discussing earlier. It's about, in terms of the exercise, it's about releasing some of the tension, really, in your brain, making you think about something else, clearing your mind when you do exercise. And when you do exercise, your brain releases endorphins as well, which makes you feel good. So that's good. And diet has, of course, a direct effect in your brain, both in how, especially at your ages when your brain is growing, a healthy diet is what would make your brain grow in an optimal way in terms of creating new brain cells, these brain cells connecting, all the shape that your brain would take. All of this is affected by diet. For example, we've just finished a set of experiments. It was on rats rather than on humans, but seeing what's happening in the brains of baby rats when you feed them really high calorie diets versus normal diet, with everything else the same, doing the same amount of exercise, doing the same amount of everything. And we could see differences in brain structure, and all the brain structure to do with cognition and memory were like smaller, more, they were shrunken in the animals who had the really, really high fat diets, for example. And we're trying to understand, can this be reversed? If you switch back to healthy diet, what does it take to change the brain again? And when is the point of no return? It could be that after a certain age, you're not able to go back to a healthy brain. That's kind of questions we're trying to answer. Mercy College Belfast, you have to go. Thank you very much, goodbye. Simpson, what's happening in your brain if you are in a coma? So there's different levels of comas and different things happening in the brain in there. The biggest challenge we have with people in comas is some people are in a vegetative state, as it's called, where locked in. So we do not know, we cannot communicate with them at all. Some patients can communicate by moving their eyes or blinking or something like that, but some patients we can't communicate with them at all. So we do not know if they're conscious or not. So some could be completely unconscious, like sleeping. And some could be conscious, but they have no way of telling us. So interestingly, using the techniques I was showing you earlier, using the brain imaging, when we see what's happening in your brain every second, we can try to communicate with them. So there's been some research projects telling these patients in a coma, but they can't even blink, so we don't know, telling them to think about different things, to say yes or no. For example, this research project was to tell the patients in a coma, think about playing tennis, to say yes, and think about, I think it was walking in your house, to say no. And these two different things, when you do it in, in healthy people, these two different experiments, engage different parts of the brain. And by doing this on patients' brain, and asking them questions, some of them could clearly do the two different things. So some of them were able to understand the question, which is one thing. They were able to understand and respond to it by thinking these different things. So we could talk to them through the brain imaging. So it didn't work. It didn't work for all of them, sadly. So it's some of them are either they may not understand, or they may not be aware at all, or they may not be able to respond. But at least some of them could respond. Baron, or does anger affect the brain? Well, I mean, there's all the different emotions affect the brain in a different way. We have different brain circuits dealing with different emotions. And anger, well, sadly, I guess we've all expressed anger. It just seems to dominate. So basically, the brain regions that drive our emotions are quite primary brain regions that developed really early, in our evolution, and they tend to take over. Basically, what anger does, it would take over from the cortex we've got at the front, which is the thinking part of the brain. We need the last part of your brain, which is evolved to give you this kind of all the complex thinking we're doing now. When you are angry, if you want, this frontal part of the brain, which is really thinking rationally, is being hijacked by the primary brain, which is all about the emotions. So you don't think properly anymore, you just react to basic emotions. And that's why you do silly things, because you can't control yourself anymore. I'm probably really behind, but from it took, well, how long does it take for a person's brain to fully develop according to expectations? Well, that's interesting, because when I was your age, or probably, when I was at university, people were saying, at your age, when you're like primary school, secondary school, your brain is just like an explosion of new neurons. So that's why it's much easier for you to learn new things than for your brain to develop. Some parts of the brain only developed in late adolescence, for example. So the theory, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, was that by the time you reach 18, 20, that's it, your brain doesn't change anymore. You don't generate new neurons, so the brain is static. After that, it's the only way is down. Now we know this is wrong, because of course you wouldn't be able to learn anything after that if this was the case. So we know now that even the adult brain is generating new neurons, so we can learn. But the brain doesn't change. The brain doesn't change anymore. So yes, I mean, certainly, in your cases, your brain is changing all the time. The brain structure, the size, the shape of your brain is changing, both externally and internally. Still in late adolescence, so some parts of the brain mature. That's what we call them, like your cheese would be a mature cheese. So some parts of the brain mature in late adolescence. After that, it doesn't change anymore in itself, but of course, things keep being updated all the time. From Simpson, does the brain of a person who has a brain tumor look different from one that does not? Yes, of course. That's what the doctors would look like. If you remember, initially, I was doing showing pictures of brain anatomy, and if you have a tumor, you would see it in the scans. So you would see that there would be a big white, usually, or black, depending on what type of scan. You do a big black hole or white hole in the brain. So the brain looks different because of the tumor itself. And what the tumor does, because it's growing, it's pushing the other bits of the brain away. So if you need to have the tumor taken out, by the brain surgeons, before they do anything, they will need to see, because we know in a normal, healthy brain, we know where everything is supposed to be. The bits that drive your language, the bits that drive your hand movements, we know where everything is. But if you have a tumor, and the tumor is pushing everything away, we don't know where these different parts of the brains are gone. So we're using neuroimaging to find out. So we do experiment before the surgery to make the patients talk, the patients move, so we can find out where these bits of the brain have been displaced by the tumor, so that the surgeons can know they avoid these regions when they go in. And again, these days we would use 3D printing, so the surgeons would see this usually on their screen. They would see where these regions are. But these days with 3D printing, it's even better, because the surgeons can get a physical, they can really touch the brain before they go in to prepare their surgery. I think I've skipped some questions, sorry. I had one at 11:16 for me to, well, do you think the brain is the most important organ? Well, I think so because I work in the brain, but I'm sure if you ask my colleagues working on heart, they would think the heart is the most important organ. But for me, I think the brain is. From some Bartholomew, what's the hardest part of your job? From Jay. In a way, the hardest part of the job is the same as the most pleasurable part of my job. It's the fact that technology, everything is moving so quickly. You always have to be on your toes and learn new things. You can't just stand still. You always have to learn new things. And you know, at my age, it starts to get a bit harder to learn new things as quickly as as my students can do. So the hardest part is there's so many things to do. Everything is changing so quickly. It's really hard to do one thing only. I want to do everything. I want to be involved in all the projects that everybody is doing, but I can't because there's only 24 hours in a day, and not all of it is work. So I've got to prioritize, and I find it really hard not to be working on other projects. I want to be working everywhere. Your favorite part of working with the brain, Neve? I think, so again, still from Sam Bartholomew, it was just the fact that it's all the interesting people I meet. I meet people all the time from everywhere in the world, all different professional background, and we work together on something. So that's one of the favorite parts as well. It's learning new things, but working with all these different people. How does my job make me feel? Well, I guess like everybody's job, there's good days and bad days. Sometimes you're overwhelmed. You have so many things to do. You don't know where to start. Other days you just feel really good. Like, today I'm feeling really happy talking to you, and I'm doing more teaching this afternoon. So it's, it's like up and down, but mostly up for me, I have to admit. Amy is asking where I'm from. So I was saying at the beginning, I don't know if you were there. So I'm from France. So I was born in France. I've been in here for about 20 years. Go back to the other question. Tumor I've done. Thank you. Crumman Primary School, you've probably gone by now. Thank you, Ituquel. I don't know if there's still people around. Adam's still here. I can see you. Adam again. Yes. What's happening in the brain when a patient suffers from phantom limb syndrome? Phantom limb syndrome. So that's an interesting one. This is where, for example, you have an accident and you lose your arm because of the accident, but then you still feel that it's there, even if it's not there physically. For example, you still ache. Quite commonly, it's pain. You have pain in your arm, or you have pain in your leg, but the leg isn't there anymore. The arm isn't. Well, what's happening there is, I'm not a specialist in this area, but from what I know, is of course, your leg or your arm is gone, but the part of your brain that was dealing with the arm or the leg is still there, and it's getting confused because it's not receiving signals anymore, like, nerve signals from that limb. So it's getting a bit confused. So there's one thing's there. And another thing, of course, is because you've lost this arm or this leg, the brain is reorganizing. So this region of the brain is slowly being taken over by the regions around. And because of this fact that things are being taken over, some of the signaling, some of the messages into the neurons are getting a bit mixed. So suddenly this bit that was dealing with your left arm or something is getting signal which is nothing to do with the left arm, but it's still rooted in the left arm, so it doesn't know what to do, so it feels this as pain. Things get crossed, basically. Messages get crossed. So there's various techniques to try to get rid of these pains, involving like plastic arms, looking at mirrors and things. There's ways of making this go away. Only Family Primary, if you're still here, about epilepsy from Sky, what's happening in the brain when a person has epilepsy. So there's another technique which I haven't mentioned, which we use to measure brain waves. So our brain, different regions of the brain, they're connected. So either they're connected physically to each other, or they're connected because they all, if you want, they pulsate at the same. If we have brain waves, they all talk to each other at specific frequencies. And what's happening when you have epilepsy is all these brain waves, basically your brain gets overloaded. So it starts somewhere in the brain where this rhythm of these different brain waves just start accelerating. And then all the different brain regions, they're all connected. All these brain networks were working together before. And now they're getting completely disconnected because there's some random, really fast brain waves coming on that just come on top of everything else. All these different brain regions stop talking to each other. And this is why you got the physical, depending on what the epilepsy, but in the strongest, the most acute cases, people fall on the floor and start jerking, for example, because every different parts of their brain, they just start talking in a random way. So you have, of course, far lesser versions of this. You don't know, this is called grand mal, which is the biggest, strongest type of epilepsy. But at the end, that's what happens. It's some sort of dysregulation of your brain waves, temporary, and then it goes back to normal. So again, some of my colleagues are trying to understand what's happening there and what we can do to help patients. And sometimes there's nothing you can do, nothing works. The only thing you can do is surgery, brain surgery, and removing a part of the brain that triggers the epilepsy. How is the brain affected by smoking? So some of my colleagues actually did some research in this. I mean, smoking, it's a drug, it's addictive. So like in any addiction, smoking makes you crave more cigarettes. So your brain is really craving more cigarettes. So what's happening when you're smoking is the reward system in the brain. So the brain regions that deal with, if you're winning some money or something like this. So it's the reward system of your brain gets activated. The more you smoke, the more it gets activated. And then if you're not smoking, this reward system wants to be activated. So it's creating this kind of craving for cigarette, for nicotine. But interestingly, there are some studies as well which shows that nicotine, so not smoking, I mean, I wouldn't never say that you should smoke, certainly not, and my father died from smoking, but there's some studies that have shown that nicotine in itself, so the chemicals, if you want, in a cigarette, can help with memory enhancement, for example. It can help you remember things better, but not through smoking, certainly. How does the brain let us have an awareness of dreams? From Cathal, again from Olive Family Primary. We do have a sleep study group here at King's, and they're studying, mostly in their case because it's with the hospital, people who have sleep problems. But dreams are really interesting. I mean, I'm not a specialist in this area at all. I mean, if you are interested, Cathal, or your school, if you drop me an email, I can put you in touch with some of the people who deal with, sleep and trying to understand sleep and trying to understand dream. But I know it's really fascinating. And I mean, when you're sleeping, really what the brain is doing, and when you're dreaming, I mean, one of the theories is that you are rehearsing different situations or things that could be happening in real life. So your brain is just doing scenarios, like in a film, basically trying different things, so that if these things were happening in real life, your brain would know how to react. So your brain is practicing things. But of course, because you're dreaming, you don't have self-control. You don't have this frontal part of the brain that control your awareness. All of this is sleeping, basically. So this is why your dreams are so crazy. There's no continuity. There's strange things going on. You can fly and everything, because the part of your brain that usually would tell you, no, this is not possible. This is not working. This is not physically possible. That part of the brain is just not there. It's just sleeping. So there's nothing to constrain your brain to the physical reality. So your brain just starts doing whatever it wants. And of course, your ears, I mean, in a lesser measure your eyes, but your eyes are closed, but you're still listening to things, you're still seeing things, and you may incorporate these things in your dream, because your brain will still receive signals. If somebody bangs the door, you still hear it, and then maybe that's going to filter through in your dream. So dreaming is certainly really, really interesting. And using a certain specific type of brain imaging, we can now start seeing, it's actually seeing, but you can start seeing on the screen what people are thinking about. It doesn't work like this. There's a lot of condition before, lots of training to do up the software, but then some people have used this same technology to see what people are dreaming about. Of course, everything is blurry. You can't recognize anything, but you could recognize if it's an animal shape, or if it's something coming from like the left, like a car moving from left to right or whatever. You could start with the technology we have these days. Under specific experimental conditions, we can start trying to understand what people are dreaming of. so which is really interesting and a bit really frightening at the same time. Baron, oh, thank you, you're gone. Simpsons, goodbye. Thank you. Miriam, thank you, goodbye. Amar from Holy Family Primary, if you're still here. How can your brain handle so much knowledge? That's a really good point, because there's so much going on all the time. We are overstimulated all the time, and the brain acts as a filter. Basically, we are not, dealing with all we can see, all we can hear, all we can think. There's a subconscious. A lot of the things we do are automatic. We don't have any awareness of what we do. I mean, if you think about simple things like, your breathing and all these things, you don't control this. All of this is automatic. Your eyes and your ears, I mean, all this is done automatically. But there's lots of filters, and there's different parts of your brain. There's an awareness network. But if you want, some people explain this a bit, like it's a torchlight. There's so much thing going on. It's like you have a light shining in your brain that only focuses on one thing at the time. You're just moving this light all the time. So your awareness shifts from one thing to another. So for example, I'm talking to you now, and I may not even realize somebody's behind me because I'm just so engrossed in talking to you, but I may not have, okay, I've got headphones, but I may not even have seen in a camera that there's somebody behind you. Certainly my eyes would have seen it. Part of my brain would have seen that somebody's entered the room behind me, but my awareness, I'm not aware of it because I'm focusing on talking to you. But if this person suddenly start touching me or something, then suddenly my awareness is going to shift away from you to them. So the brain is filtering the information all the time. And there's some theories that what's happening, for example, in autism, for children with autism, is that some of this filtering doesn't work anymore. You may know that, if some of your friends have got autism, or if you have autism yourself, you may know that you tend to be overstimulated in autism. There's too much going on. And one of the reasons people are saying is because this filtering doesn't work as well. So your brain is trying to take on all this information more than it can deal with. Just moving on, who's still here? So same Holy Family Primary, if you're still here, I can see the teacher, you're still here, I don't know if the children are. From Aidan, does obesity have any effect on brain function? So I guess I mentioned it a bit later. So yes, it would have some impact on brain function. So we see some differences in brain structure and brain function. So of course, if you have differences in brain structure, some region of the brain would be smaller, and then this would have some impact on the function itself. But the good news is that, especially at your ages, all of this is probably reversible. So you have to do, if you start doing exercise, if you have to, a bit more careful in terms of diet, which you should see some positive effects quite quickly there. But of course, sometimes obesity is nothing to do with, it's in your genes as well. So, sometimes it's not something, it's not something you do, you just like that. But still, doing exercise and eating healthily will certainly help there. I guess last question from Evan about, is the brain, that's an interesting one, is the brain affected by chemotherapy? So chemotherapy is some of the treatment you receive. So after, if you have cancer, oops, sorry, my battery is running low. Sorry, I'll be back in a second. Okay, sorry, I had plugged in my computer into a socket which was off. So chemotherapy is drugs you take when you have cancer, for cancer treatment, to try to kill the tumors. And yes, chemotherapy has an effect in the brain. It's called a chemo brain. Actually, that's what it's called, or the chemo fog, because it affects your cognition, it affects your memory. So usually a lot of patients after chemotherapy or during chemotherapy report that they can't focus as well as before. They can't remember things as much as before. The good news there is temporary. It's just an effect of the drugs, basically. So once the drug, once the treatment is finished, then everything goes back to normal for most people. And I think I don't have any more questions. That's it. I've gone to the end of it. So we're still, Adam, you're still here, and Holy Primary, you're still here. So.
And it is a wonderful, wonderful presentation, Vincent. Thank you very much, and thank you guys, and the Holy Family and Adam. Some great questions, and the others, but they've all gone now, so I can't tell them. Okay. But thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Oh, is anything else there? Oh yeah, thank you from Holy Family there as well. So I think we'll close it down now. We've run a bit over, as you can see.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
And I'll drop you an email, Vincent, and we'll also try and find out the email address. I think it's Adam, wasn't it, who wanted to? Yeah,
Adam wanted. Yeah, if you send me an email. Yeah.
Okay, we'll do. I shall send them an email for them.
Yep.
Okay. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to end the meeting now.
Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.